Hello, my name is Lori Vogel, and I am a school social worker in Fayette County Schools. And today we're going to be discussing how to advocate for your client in the school system. I'm going to let my co-presenters go ahead and present themselves.
I'm Lori Lazzari, and I too am an employee of the Fayette County Public Schools.
My name is Cayce Batts. I'm a school social worker in far western Kentucky at Fulton Independent Schools. I'm based at an elementary school.
Thank you for coming to our session today. We are going to start at this point. We're going to kind of be answering these questions today. Who would be the best person to be your ally in the school for your client? What information do I need to help my client in the school? What services are they getting? What services could they get? And how does my client access those services? So those are things we hope to cover during this time today. So our first question was, who would be the best person to be your ally in the school for your client, and what support staff does my client have in a school? Obviously, all schools are very different, and they have many different folks that work in schools. So one great place to start is to check the district and the school's website for staff who work at the school and the job titles that they have. Another place to look is on the EPSB, which is the Educational Professional Standards Board, on their website, which is very similar to the Social Work Board website. You can check teacher certifications. You can check anybody who is a certified employee. You can check their certification, and it also can give you a list of everybody that works in the school system and for a particular county. So I'm hoping that this will work, but if you look on this site right here, you can easily just look for a district. So let's say Adair County, and you can search, and it will show you everybody that works in that county. So if you're looking for the guidance counselor at Adair County Middle School, you would be able to find it right here on this EPSB website. So this is a great resource to be able to use. So another thing to do is your school secretary. Let's face it, they know everything. They are a great person to talk to. Also, every school has a secretary, so you can usually always check with that person. Another person, the registrar, if you have questions as far as like helping a student, one of your clients register, or for what information that they need to bring to school to register, this is a great person to talk to. So those are just a couple different people that are always, you can pretty much find in every school.
So what information do I need to help my client in school, and what information can I get? So many parents are not aware of their rights under an act called the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, commonly known in our world as FERPA. So it's really important that you help your clients understand what records they have access to at the school setting and how to get those records. So any educational institution that receives federal funds are going to lose those funds unless we provide parents with access to and the right to challenge their child's full educational record. So parents have the rights to come to school and find out what is in their child's record. Now, schools do have a certain amount of time that they can take in order to provide those educational records. Most of the time, if parents come to our school, I provide them with a room to look at the students' records in, but we cannot deny a parent the right to those records. Also, if a parent goes through a record and finds that there are some misleading records or things that they feel like are inaccurate, they have the right to challenge those records and request that they be removed. They also have the right to consent before any records are shown to outside parties. So we as the school system cannot just take those records and show them. Let's say you are advocating on the behalf of your client, you can't just come in and request those records. We would need to have a release of information from you, which we're going to talk about in just a few minutes, to you from the parent. That's what I should have said. If as your client is 18 years of age or older, then they have the right to give you access to those records. The records, once you're 18, the right to the records on behalf of the parents is lost unless there is a waiver. So keeping in mind that if you're working with someone 18 or over, they can request those records. So basically, just a few simple FERPA requirements. The FERPA regulations are long and tedious, but just a few things that you need to know is that FERPA requirements require that FERPA rights are told to parents annually. So usually on our websites, on social media, there is a notice put out that parents have the right to look at their child's records. They have the right to establish hearing procedures in the event of disagreement. So there has to be a due process hearing procedure in place in case parents would like to challenge what's in those records or disagree with something that has happened with those records. And schools are required to keep on file any requests that outsiders bring into the school for school records. So those usually go into the CUME folder so that a parent, if they want to look, can see where their child's records have gone. Of course, that is with their consent. So hopefully they remember where they have allowed the records to be sent. So parents must be shown the records no more than 45 days after requesting to see them. Any item in the records can have a validity challenge, which we just talked about. And as you know, that once a student is over 18, they can waive the right to see confidential letters. So many of you probably waived your right to see reference letters or letters of recommendation to your colleges. The right of a school to release personal information about a pupil to a third party is restricted without the consent. And pupils and parents have to be notified of their rights in order to help them understand that they have access to records. One thing we do have to remember, though, is that even a non-custodial parent does have the right to review those records, even if a custodial parent says they do not want the non-custodial parent to see them. If they are the parent of that child, then they still have the rights to look and review those records unless the rights have been terminated. So if you're working with a non-custodial parent and a school or someone has told them that they cannot see those records, that is incorrect. They would have the right to review. So a lot of times when there's a custody challenge or a custody dispute, then one parent will say that the other parent can't see those records. So some exceptions that people have to be aware of. Sometimes parents get angry if their child's information is disclosed in a directory. So a lot of times PTAs will put out, a list of parents' information and student names and phone numbers. They can be put out. Directories are not illegal, but parents have to have the right to say they do not want to be in that directory, so they have the right to opt out. If a school official with a legitimate educational interest wants to have access to those records, that is an exception to FERPA. So for example, if a student transfers between schools, then the other school is allowed to have information about that student. Also, if a teacher in the building wants to review their student's record, they can do that. Now, not of the whole school, but they would have a legitimate educational interest in reviewing a record of a student that is in their class. If you are subpoenaed, if we are subpoenaed by a court, then we have the right to release those records. Usually we consult with our attorneys for the district before we release anything, but parents need to understand that if we get a subpoena, then we are under an obligation to submit what is necessary. If there's a health and safety emergency, then we would not have to have permission from a parent to release information. And there are some exceptions when it comes to state and local authorities within the juvenile justice system and what we can release to them. So it's really important if you're working with a client or you're trying to figure out what records you have access to or they have access to, that you consider this act. Releases of information is what you need. So what information would you like from a school, and when do you need it by? That's a really critical thing to have on your release of information. So most of the time our releases are for academic performance, the grades, the types of classes students are in, test scores, and there's some list of specific test scores that you might want to ask for, behavior referrals and observations, attendance, verbal communication. We do have logs that we keep of our verbal communication. So lots of times people ask for that. You might want some information if a student is receiving special education services, if they have a 504 plan, or if they have a program service plan, if they're identified as an English as a second language student.
The next section we're going to talk about are what services are my client getting, and what service could they get, and how can they get access to those services. So the first thing that we need to talk about is the process of the multi-tiered system of supports. So the key concept for MTSS, as we call it, is that we don't wait for students to fail anymore. Instead of waiting for them to fail, we look to see who is having difficulty. And this can be with academic, social, and emotional. So the most important part that we start out with is doing some type of universal screening so that we can determine who is having difficulty. Academically, this is what we use a lot of tests, like you'll hear kids talk about the MAP test or something like that. We use that to see where they're at so that if we need to put them in any type of intervention, then we have that. Many schools, and our district is working on this as well, a universal screener for emotional health. And so that is a piece that we're working on getting started in our district, but hopefully that will be in all districts at some point. There's also information you can look for as far as knowing if kids are having difficulty with emotional and behavioral areas, such as behavior referrals, attendance, school nurse logs, anything like that that would kind of flag that a student is having difficulty. MTSS has different tiers of interventions, and we'll show you a graphic about that in just a second. But basically, there are 3 tiers, and as a student needs more help, they would move up through these tiers. Ongoing data collection is very important in the MTSS progress. So teachers keep ongoing data to make sure that students are getting where they need. School-wide approach to expectations and support is very important, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. And then parent involvement. These are all informing parents where their students are in this process. So if you look at this graphic, the multi-tiered system of supports is in attendance, behavior, academic, and social emotional. And so at my school, we have a team that works in all 3 or all 4 of these areas. We have an attendance team where we look to see which kids are struggling with attendance. We have a behavioral team that helps to look at behavior referrals and just how kids are doing in the school as a whole. Then we have our biggest focus most of the time is on academic, and students that are not doing well would be included into extra classes or intervention. And then our social emotional learning. This is a progress or a system that we are starting in our schools where we help them learn social and emotional competencies. And so all of these teams are directed by the administrators, which are parts of these teams, teachers, support staff, educators, special education. We all work together to make sure that we are not letting kids slip through the cracks. So at tier 1, this is our universal. This is where the majority of our students are going to lie. Most children are going to get the instruction that is given to them. 75 to 90% of students are going to understand just being taught this in the regular classroom. And so for those students that don't, then they would move to tier 2. Many times this is going to be a small group kind of class. So if you have a student who's having difficulty learning to read, then we would assess that and then put them into a smaller group to help them get a tier 2 instruction, which would be in a smaller situation. Usually 10 to 25% of kids are in, and 25 is actually kind of a large number on that. It's usually about 10 to 15% of the students in a in a school that are needing secondary or tier 2 intervention. So tier 3 is after tier 1 and tier 2 don't work, then we need to look at something that's even a bit more structured. And that would be tier 3 intervention. Many times this is a small group, and then the teacher pulls a student aside and gives them more one-on-one instruction. So as far as looking at it through the behavioral side, this is kind of how the tiered system works. So at the bottom, we have all of these interventions that the whole school gets. So the whole school would get things like sources of strength or second step or mindfulness training. And then those students that are continuing to have behavioral concerns would move up to the yellow area, which is more smaller group things like mentoring or check-in, check-out, which is a program that we use in the school where a student would check in with a teacher or staff member at the beginning of the day, talk about how their day is going, and then at the end of the day, check out with them to see how the day went and making goals and things like that. We have a lot of our groups, CBITS, Fuerte, Target, all of those groups that would help students with social, emotional, and behavioral. And then the kids that are still needing intervention after that, we move up to the top part of the pyramid. And this is the 1 to 5% area where we would have more wraparound services. We would have functional behavior assessments, trauma-informed safety plans. These are the most intense students that we have in our school that we would be working with these. So this video or this picture is just kind of another of the universal supports where we have some of the groups and things that we do, positive school climate, we'll talk about in a minute, as well as social emotional learning, positive behavior and disciplinary practices, trauma-informed practices, and these are all things that all students in the school get. Then we go to, again, our targeted interventions, which is, again, some lunch bunch. That's a very popular one at my school, where students would meet with our school social workers or our counselors, or even our SRO has a lunch bunch at my school. So these are kind of small groups that students that just need a little extra support would be able to be involved in. And then we have counseling, positive reinforcement, conflict resolution. So these are all kind of just more targeted interventions that our students might need. And then again, we go to tier 3, which we talked about a minute ago. These are our most intense students that would get these types of interventions. So a big question is, how do I get my student placed in special education? So basically, a student has to go through all 3 of the tiers that we just talked about before they would be able to be referred for special education. Most of the time, the school is the one who refers a student for special education because they have not met the progress that was intended after going through this tiered system. But a parent also can make that request, and the best way to do that is to send a letter to a school administrator to get the process started. Make sure that in this, the parent talks about the concerns that they're having. And if there is already a disability that is known, then that is very helpful to have that already on file. So once the letter is received, the school has 10 days to set up a meeting. That doesn't mean the meeting will be in 10 days, but it means that the meeting will be set up in those 10 days. So at that meeting, the teachers and parents will review the students' behavioral, academic, and social levels of functioning. If the group sees evidence that there is a disability, then they will begin the intervention process. So when a parent refers, sometimes we don't have them on an intervention list yet because they may not be as serious as the parent might think, but the school they may not be. Most of the time, students that are in intervention have to be in the 25th percentile or lower in their academic areas. So we do need to begin that process of intervention. So response to intervention is the name of the process. And basically that means that they would be in small intervention classes where we use evidence-based interventions that would occur for 4 to 6 weeks, and progress monitoring must occur. So the teacher would present the students each day with their instruction, and then once a week they would pull them aside and give them a small assessment to help them to make sure that that intervention is working. the interventions have to be in the area of what the suspected disability is. So if you have a reading, if comprehension is the problem, then we're probably not going to work on phonics. We're going to work on comprehension. So there are lots of different disabilities that students can have. The one that we see a lot of is other health impaired, or OHI. Many times this is an area where a student may be doing okay academically, but they're having a lot of difficulty with behavior. And so that's an area that a lot of students with ADHD are in. Same thing kind of goes with emotional behavior disorder. A lot of kids may be doing okay, but their behavior is beginning to impact how they are doing academically. So these are many of the areas that you'll probably hear the most about as far as special education disabilities. Once the interventions have been given to the student for 4 to 6 weeks, the ARC, which is Admissions and Release Committee, will set a meeting up. And if the interventions are successful, then the student will just continue on getting those interventions and they will not be tested. If the interventions are not successful, then at that point in time, an assessment plan will be written and the parent will give then permission for the school to test. The school will have 60 school days to complete that assessment. After the assessment, if the ARC meets and decides that the suspected disability is confirmed and the student does have a disability, then they will write an individualized education plan, or an IEP. This can be, students can be given many services and be, pardon me, specially designed instruction will be given to that student. That can be through co-teaching classes or collaboration, which that's when a teacher actually goes into the classroom with an additional teacher and they work together to help provide that student with the instruction that they need. Resource classes are when a student is pulled out of the main class and put into a resource class. So that's where a student would have less than 10 students that are in the class so that they would get a little bit more individualized attention. Other services, counseling services can be provided, speech and language therapy, PT and OT can be provided as a related service. So if a student has a disability, then they can also have PT and OT if it's determined that they need that. Visual and hearing impairment services are also ones that are provided.
So what is a 504? And how is it different from a special education IEP, and who can qualify? So Section 504 falls under the Rehabilitation Act of 1974, and it protects people with disabilities against discrimination for reasons related to that disability. So if a student or your client is eligible for a 504 plan, it means that they have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits at least one major life activity. And those include things like walking, hearing, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, writing, working, caring for oneself, performing manual tasks. So what ends up happening is a parent or a teacher will make a referral for a 504 plan. And an evaluation will be conducted, and we will use a variety of sources to evaluate. So we will talk with the parents, a teacher, we may have releases of information for therapists, and a physician. Now, in order for a student to qualify, they must have a physician statement completed by the doctor who is working with them or who has made the diagnosis. So a child has to have a diagnosis in order to qualify. So we will have to have a physician statement that is signed and explains what that diagnosis is. It has to have an ICD code or DSM code. So it's not as complicated as a special ed referral, except it just sounded that way, didn't it? If the 504 committee determines that the student is eligible for a 504 because they do have documentation that a mental or physical impairment substantially limits one of those major life activities that we referred to, then we will put in a accommodation and modification plan in place. And basically, this is to ensure that students have equal educational access or opportunities. And most of the time, it is things that we are already doing, that we've already been putting in, that we've already put in place because we know it makes the student successful. But this is a way to put it in writing, especially if you work with a transient population. That's really important because this 504 will follow them. So while a school may be really great at putting in accommodations for kids who are really struggling and who have those substantial limitations, it's very important to get that in writing. And it's also important as the students start to transition from elementary to middle and middle to high, that those are updated and things are put in place as those students move through those transitions. The accommodations for a 504 plan are usually done by the classroom teacher. So some examples of the accommodations that a 504 plan would most likely offer are extended time, which is time and a half or double time, a behavior modification strategies. They may be on a behavior chart. They may have check-in and check-outs with a staff member. Small group testing. They may have a paraphrasing. They may have one-on-one testing. And they may have some technology accommodations, such as they're allowed to type on the computer. That used to be more of a big deal when we were taking paper pencil tests. So those are some of the things that we look for when we think about 504 accommodations. Now, most of the time, those are probably what we most see. A lot of times 504s are written for medical disabilities, such as asthma. So then those accommodations would be much more geared, of course, to whatever their medical needs are. Diabetes is another medical area that a lot of times for. So you would want to make sure in your evaluation and consultation that you're consulting with the medical personnel to put those accommodations in place. Special education accommodations usually come about and they are probably a little more geared toward academic disabilities like a reader or scribe. They have some comparisons to 504. You see that extended time, reinforcements, and behavior modifications. Calculators, if a child has a math disability, they will be allowed to have a calculator on non-calculator portions of a test. One-on-one testing, small group testing, same as 504s. So special education is usually when we get more toward those academic indicators of a reader or scribe, because you have to have data to support those.
Yeah, another thing just to help differentiate a 504 and special ed is typically a school can be looking for, or they can confirm a diagnosis or a disability. They can actually determine that there is one, whereas with a 504, the parent provides that disability. We don't actually assess for a disability. There's already one that has been established. And a lot of times people ask who can fill out the physician statement. That tends to be different in each district. In some districts, they only want a doctor to fill that out. In our district, licensed clinical social workers can do it, psychologists can do it, pretty much anybody who is licensed that sees that student for therapy. So those are a few things that are different. Another thing is with special education, services are actually provided by special education teachers. And with 504, it's typically just accommodations that are given. So those are just kind of some differences, because sometimes that's a good question that a lot of people want to know. So as far as advocating for services, things that people outside the school can do to help your client is help them understand this process of how that process goes for special education. It's a long process, and it is not one that, like, the school is not trying to be difficult with that. It's just that is the process that the state has created, and that is the one that we have to go by. A 504, that process is much quicker because we just need proof of a disability, really. I've had students that brought in their parents that brought in the form on Monday, and by the next week we've written a 504. So that can be a lot quicker. You can help your client by contacting the school and helping them make that parent referral. You can also help by helping them understand the areas to which they're going to be tested. Also understanding the importance of attending all the ARC meetings. I don't know how many times parents will be very involved in elementary school, and then we try to have ARCs in middle school where I'm at, and we cannot find anybody anymore. It's like they've kind of lost interest in it. So making sure that they come to all those ARCs, because that's where these services, that's where it's all discussed. Everything that happens, it can only change when there's an ARC meeting. So having that parent be there is very important. Understanding school jargon, we know there's like a million acronyms for school and abbreviations and all those things. So helping them understand that is very helpful. Helping them advocate for services that they can receive. So knowing what they can get in a school is very helpful. So knowing, what services that special education provide. Maybe you think that your student needs counseling in the school system. Well, advocate for that. Help the parent ask for that. Same with 504s, helping them advocate for those accommodations. If your client has anxiety about taking tests, then advocate for them to get extended time during that. They can get time and a half, or they can get double time for taking tests. And when we get to high school and have to take the ACT, that is very helpful to a lot of students. Understand the different services and how those different services can be accessed, and making sure that they're getting the services that are on their IEP. I mean, schools aren't perfect. So there are times when students may not be getting the services that they're supposed to be getting. So helping that student know what their own services are and advocating for themselves to get those services is good and helpful. And then if they don't qualify for services, what can we do then? Because schools they want to be helpful. They want to help students out. So if a student doesn't qualify for special education, then we need to come up with a plan for what to do to help them. Typically, if a parent wants a 504, then usually the school system will give that 504 to a parent if there is a diagnosis.
So we also want to talk to you a little bit about our English as a second language learners. So students who have limited English proficiency are known as ELL. And so when our students who are English language learners come to enroll in Kentucky, we give their parents a home language survey. And if the parent identifies another language as their primary language spoken at home, our ELL teachers or ELL staff will give them an ELL screener to determine if they need to be in ELL classes. If a student is determined to need those classes, then we are able to provide them with what we call a program service plan. And this is a way to give our ELL students some accommodations that are going to help them get kind of an equal playing field when it comes to taking assessments. ELL students are expected in their second full year of being in a U.S. school, they are required to take the state test, all parts of the state test. Their first year, there are some exemptions, and they only have to take math and as a fourth grader, science. And then in as they get into middle and high school, there are some other exemptions for them in their first year. So some of the things that we provide to those students on that program service plan is extended time, simplified language, which is like paraphrasing, access to a bilingual dictionary or reader on assessments. And that way that will help those students who struggle with English as a second language to be able to show us what they know. In order to exit a program, the students take what we call an access assessment each year. And this is a way to measure their progress as they go through the grades of school to see if they have achieved a certain level in their English language retention, and they can exit the program. These are given in January and February of each year, and usually we know the outcome or the get the scores in April, so that we would be able to tell those students that they have exited from the program. So if you have students that are English language learners, please call if you have any questions, or have a parent call so that they understand that process.
So next up, we have the PBIS, which is Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. And so this is part of an MTSS support, and this is a school-wide implementation or intervention that schools implement. It's tier 1, so it's a school-wide, district-wide initiative, and it helps promote positive behavior throughout the school day, regardless if a student has any of the other individual interventions that we've discussed previously, such as a 504 or an RTI group or an IEP or any type of SPED services. And so the 4 pillars of a strong PBIS system are shown here on the graphic. And that includes social competence and academic achievement, supporting decision-making, supporting student behavior, and supporting staff behavior. And so schools that implement a strong PBIS system really examine the systems, the data, the practices to ensure that they're aligning with these principles. The goal is for all of the practices to promote positive behavior and strong academics. And so when these practices are implemented with fidelity, there's research showing that student academics improve, as well as student behavior as well, that decreases. So here in my district, as part of our PBIS system, we implement KASSW. So all of our homeroom teachers have KASSW, and it's a technology-based system that they use on their phones or iPads or tablets, whatever they're using in the classroom. And it's a point-based system that rewards students for positive behavior. And at any given moment, parents can access this, the teachers can access this. So it's really helpful for that full comprehensive approach for parents to be on the same page. And so this is a resource that would be helpful for social workers in the school system to know about as well. Another intervention is that my colleagues mentioned earlier was the check-in, check-out system. And so some schools implement that more on a tier 2 or tier 3 intervention level with students that may need a little bit more intensive support. And that just provides a little bit more routine and interactive support for monitoring that student behavior. But regardless of what the practice is, it's helpful to know what is used. Because when we know what different interventions and systems are used within the school system, that can be a helpful way to monitor our students' behavior and their performance. And so as a clinician or a caseworker or whatever your role is in collaborating with the school system to support your client, it can be really helpful to know what their PBIS practices are and to review this with the student and the family so that you're really supporting that school day, those school day functions. So right now, SEL, social emotional learning, is kind of the hot topic. And so lots of schools are really starting to incorporate more SEL practices in their school day. And so I love this graphic. I refer back to it all the time because it really encompasses everything that SEL is about. So social emotional learning is based on 5 different pillars, and that's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, responsible decision-making, and relationship skills. And so it's really combining the academic curriculum with a social emotional approach. And so you can see this at the classroom level, you can see this at the school level, within families and other caregivers, and even within the community. And so specifically here in my school district, we offer a SEL specials rotation. So just like the students get art once a week, or they get computers once a week, or library time, they also have a class designated just for SEL. And that has been an incredible advancement that we've made recently, that our students have shown so much progress because they're getting a dedicated time to focus on these more social and emotional skills that oftentimes is overlooked when we're just focusing on academic standards. And so not only can this be implemented in the classroom through like morning announcements and a mindful minute when students are transitioning from class to class and they may be overstimulated, but it can also be incorporated within our families and our caregivers in our community. And so another practice that we do here at our district, we have parent cafes. And so once a month, I lead a parent cafe with parents and caregivers and guardians. And it's just really a safe place where we invite parents in, and it's just a casual and laid back atmosphere where we just have conversation about parenting and what works and what doesn't work. And that's another effort that we have to really promote social emotional learning. And again, not just with our students, but with our family unit as a whole. And so, again, you can see this reflected in, or you can see this evident in one-on-one supports with students. You can see it in a classroom setting. You can see it through even disciplinary actions. Just having this well-rounded approach where social emotional learning is on the forefront. And so, like we previously talked about with PBIS, strong SEL programs also promote positive behavior and academic achievement. And so what are some other supportive measures or other ways that schools can help? Finding out what type of emotional support groups the school offers. So I run small groups here, small therapy groups here in my district. And likely that the student that your client is in, there will be access to different emotional groups. And so asking can never hurt. That's the best way to find out. Asking what SEL programs they use. There's so many different SEL programs out there, and many schools have them. It's just a matter of knowing which one. And a lot of them also offer resources for parents at home. So the one that I use here in my school district with my elementary students, it has send home, it has resources you can send home. It has different programs that parents can log into from their home, and also support some of these lessons and concepts that are being taught at school so that they can incorporate it at home too, and really provide that continuity of services. Does the school have other professionals that can help with your clients? So do they have licensed mental health providers? Do they have behavior specialists? Is the school counselor available? What services can those provide? And so asking and knowing who is in the building and what they can offer is really helpful. And then also lots of schools now have calm down areas in this district. So behind me back here, I have a little calm down area, and with the lighting, you can't see it too well, but I have like a bed canopy, and it has, the students have the option to play music over here, and there's different tactile things they can use for sensory needs. We have some classrooms that have closet areas that are designated as a calm down corner. We have one for anybody in the school. And so these are also different tools that students can use. Our students know here at the school that anytime they need a calm down moment, they can go straight to their designated area when they're starting to feel that arousal or that dysregulation. And that's something, regardless of your role, again, if you're a case manager or you're a clinician, you can really advocate for your student or your client to use these services in the school day to help their functioning, to help support their performance within the school day. And I always say, you don't know until you ask. There's no such thing as a dumb question. And so really just reaching out to those within the school system, asking, what does my student have access to? How can we support them? What resources are available?
So what do you do if things are not going well at your school for your clients? And we want you guys to make sure that you really emphasize to your clients and want you guys to know that we love collaboration. And I know that sometimes things happen and parents and clinicians get a little frustrated. And so before people decide that they would like to call the Board of Education or the superintendent, we want to make sure that you guys start at the school level. So really what it is necessary is go up the chain of command in the school. So if you are having difficulties and you're dealing with a teacher, or you're dealing with the district mental health specialist or the counselor, whoever it is in the school that you are dealing with, if you're having a frustrating moment and you can't solve it with them, then go to the principal. If you go straight to the district level, then you're going to lose some credibility with the school. So start with the chain of command at the school. Also, a lot of times parents haven't contacted the teacher with their concern, and the teacher may not even be aware that there is a problem. We have lots of times where the kids go home and tell their parents that, something has happened in the classroom, and unfortunately, they didn't come and tell the teacher, so the teacher wasn't aware. So have your parents or yourself contact the teacher and start there with that concern, and so that it can be resolved in the classroom. That's the best place to start. Contact a student support staff member, such as the school social worker or psychologist or counselor, because they are really good at being a liaison between you and the school staff member in which there is a problem. So call one of them and they will be happy to work as a mediator if you need it. Know the structure of the school. Now, remember, Lori said at the beginning, the school secretary is the person to know at a school. They will be more than happy to talk to you about who is in the building that can help you, transfer you to somebody that they know can speak to you or find out an answer. Lots of schools have grade level administrators that are in charge of only one grade level. That's another great place to start, especially at the middle and high schools. They may know that student better than even if you contacted the head principal. And after exhausting all of those resources, then call the district central office and they can help you navigate to the school's administrative director or the district ombudsman. But we hope it doesn't get to that. We love collaboration. We encourage collaboration and you bringing those concerns, having your parents bring those concerns so that we can resolve that to make the student more successful at the school level.
Thank you. We wanted to talk just a few minutes about kind of a new adventure that we're all getting ready to take here in the school system. Some districts are farther ahead than other districts, but in 2019, the School Resiliency and Safety Act put into law that school trauma-informed care needed to be, that all schools need to be trauma-informed. So we wanted to talk about that for just a few minutes. Again, like I said, this is kind of a change for schools. So we're moving from the paradigm of thinking about a student as in what's wrong with you into what's happened to you. So we're trying to look at students in a different light. Of course, a lot of all of the school social workers had already looked at students in this manner, but for teachers, this is kind of a new concept. So a lot of times it's really hard to separate the behavior from why the behavior is occurring for teachers to see. So that's something that we're working on. So the requirements of a trauma-informed school is enhancing trauma awareness throughout the school community. So we're having a lot of trainings and PDs right now about what trauma is and learning how it changes the brain and learning about reactions to trauma and basically all those things that we've been learning for a long time in social work, but schools are just now starting to get involved in that. Conducting assessment of the school climate, which most of the time we already do as part of the PBIS program anyway. So this is something that hopefully we're already doing, but we do want to, we are also including inclusiveness and respect for diversity as part of that. Creating trauma-informed discipline policies. Now, this one is kind of difficult for administrators. You know, they want to throw the book at kids sometimes. So having them start to develop a more supportive discipline policy using restorative practices is something that we're starting to see a lot of benefits from that. Instead of students, they get in a fight, being suspended for 10 days, let's do a restorative practice where we put them in the room together and mediate, and then, cut those days into much less if they're able to participate. One of the things that it talks about is collaborating with law enforcement to create procedures for notification. So if the police go out to a house and they determine that domestic violence is going on, then we get a notification to check in with that student. It doesn't really give us what happened. It just says, in Fayette County, we call it handle with care. So they just send us an email that says the student's name, and then we go in and check on them. Sometimes they tell us nothing. Sometimes it all comes out. So providing services and programs designed to reduce the negative impact of trauma, supporting critical learning, and fostering a positive and safe school environment. So we already are doing PBIS in most of our schools. So we're looking at how to make that PBIS system also trauma informed. So we started doing that this year at our school, and it's hard, but it's really helping. One of the most important people to know trauma-informed practices is your safe attendant or your in-school suspension person. That can make all the difference, because that's where the kids go that are dysregulated after they've gotten in trouble. So having that person become trauma-informed is very important. And then one of the things was that each student is known by one person at the school well. So kind of a name and claim kind of activity where each teacher attempts to get to know each one of their students. A lot of times this is done through the social emotional learning time. If that's when the student has a teacher, then they kind of get to know that student a little better personally, because social emotional learning, they're learning new things about themselves and self-care and self-regulation. So that's usually a good time to do that. So along with, we like our tier 1, tier 2s, and tier 3s here. So we also have this in the trauma-informed teams. So our trauma-informed team, tier 1, would be a team that looked at the school, how our trauma-informed practices in each classroom. They would be training those teachers and helping them understand what trauma is. And so at our school, that's our PBIS team. It's our school administrators, our counselors, social workers, mental health, our safe teacher or in-school suspension teacher. So we're all looking at how these practices are going in classrooms and what our discipline policies are. And then a tier 2 team and tier 3 they would be actually looking for students that are having difficulty because of trauma and screening them and connecting them to resources to help them be successful. So they might have to look outside the school to provide them with trauma groups if there's not anything in the school, or if there is, then they would help with them with being in a CBITS group or a target group or something like that. They also make plans to help students, trauma-informed plans, so they could pull a student aside and just talk to them. Okay, let's discuss what triggers are. What do you do when that happens? What do you feel your body doing? And what can we do to keep you from becoming dysregulated? And if you do, what can you do and where can you go to help yourself get through that period of time? So the team is coordinated by school-based mental health service provider. This is what's in statute. That can be the school social worker, school psychologist, or school counselor, or another employed mental health provider. So it needs to be somebody who is in the school. A best practice would be that, all these other folks are involved too: school administrator, family resource, youth service center coordinator, which we've not talked about too much, but they are invaluable in your school. I can't live without mine. Your SRO can be involved. In fact, I told you our SRO does tier 2 groups, so it's great to have them involved if they're one that you trust can be involved. And then the tier 1 can have a community member on it, because we're not talking about personal things. We're talking about the overall school. So this has an example district plan. We'll send out this and you can look over at those as well. And these are just some resources. If you need any great resources on trauma-informed practices, Heather Forbes is an LCSW who has a lot of great books about trauma-informed schools and practices in schools. Just a few things for you to look at right now as far as current legislation that we have been looking at. And Senate Bill 102, that was just introduced and just passed the House, the Senate Education Committee. And this is going to help our schools count how many mental health providers are actually in school. Every year in November, the state counts only school counselors. And that was part of the School Safety and Resiliency Act, but that is going to be changing, hopefully, if this bill passes. So they will then count school social workers, school psychologists, because the biggest goal of the School Safety and Resiliency Act was getting to the ratio of 250 students to 1 mental health practitioner. So we are working toward that. However, House Bill 1 this year became a little bit of a problem with that, because they did not include the $7.4 million funding that was in the budget for the past 2 years. So basically, they cut this funding out, which means that districts like Fulton Independent are going to be scrambling to find funding to be able to provide services or provide funding for their mental health coordinator, who happens to be one of the people on our call today, Ms. Batts. So if you could call your Senate member and ask them to have that funding included back into the Senate's part of the budget, then that would be extremely helpful, especially if you are in Western Kentucky or if you're in Eastern Kentucky. Eastern Kentucky is another area that has hired people with this funding. And if it's not there next year, they are not going to be able to fund them unless they find some other way. Another bill that we're supporting this year is House Bill 44. This is a bill that allows students to take mental health days, which was actually created by students, and they brought it to some legislators. It's bipartisan. They came together and talked about how this is very important. And one thing that we really love about this is that if a student does take a mental health day, then we can find out that that has happened, and we can check with that student to make sure that they're doing okay. So these are 3 bills that are really important in the school system right now. I mean, there's a lot of really bad ones that are out there, but these are actually ones that we need some help advocating for, and in addition to. So House Bill 1, we need to call those people and say we need that funding put back in.
And I think this is the epitome of social work lobby day, is this call to action for us to all advocate for our profession. And so, you know, I would really encourage you. I know the first time that I called and tried to speak with my legislators, it was a little intimidating. You know, I thought, what are they going to ask me? Am I going to know the right answers? Am I going to know? Really an easy process. I'm going to provide the phone number for you all if you want to have a pen ready. It's 1-800-372-7181. And so when you call that number, it's a really friendly and just casual way of just dropping in and telling what you would appreciate your representative supporting or voting for. And they don't ask you any scary questions. They just ask you, you know, what message you want to leave for them. And it's really a carefree process. And so I would encourage you, you know, as your call to action today, to consider these pieces of legislation that we've shared with you, and also the others that we've shared throughout this day. You know, there's so many out there that we need to be responding to as social workers, following our code of ethics. And so I would encourage you to call that number today and to advocate for the funding for our field.
Absolutely. And it's like she said, it's very stress-free. If you call that number, you can just say you want to leave a message, and they'll take your information as like your address, and then they will ask who you want to leave it for. And then you just leave a message. That's very stress-free. You know, if you want to get more involved and call your actual legislator and talk to them, then that would even be more fabulous, because we need support all across the state for these initiatives, and definitely for restoring that $7.4 million funding. So if you have any questions, these are our email addresses. Please feel free to send us an email. Does anybody else have any other things they would like to add today? All right. Thank you all very much for attending today, and we'll see you at the rally.